So good afternoon and welcome to today's lecture. This is the first of the three series of lectures that will take place on integrated marketing communications, implementation and control phase. As we previously stressed, although planning and control are two different phases in the entire MC planning circle, given that control contains the very metrics that are also the KPIs that buttress our objectives during the planning phase, I will be considering them at the same time, that is, planning and how we can close the circle with the same metrics in terms of control. Last week we went through the big idea, creative strategy, and how to set communication objectives. This week is going to focus on media strategy. However, I will start with the advertising brief. As I said, it's a top priority given that it's part and parcel of your assignment and your key requirements. I have already circulated an email as regards the contents of the advertising brief, where I was quite emphatic about the fact that belts and belts, the briefing form that's contained in the key textbook, is more towards the sign of the internal briefing form that circulates in the advertising agency from the client department, the client service department, or account management to the creative team. However, given that you're working in your assignment as a brand management team, and the equivalent form that this will circulate from the brand management team to the account management of the ad agency is slightly different, I've modified that form in order to make it more comprehensive, but also in order to include more explanatory notes about the context, the contents that must populate the different sections. I've also uploaded two different briefing guidelines, briefing guides with guidelines from the Australian marketing magazine in cooperation with Ogilvy, and the other one is from the Canadian Association for Advertising Agencies. Especially the second one is very comprehensive as regards different sources of data that you can draw on in different parts of your brief. So it's quite a useful resource. I'm also going to touch on some of the sources in this brief, but it's of paramount importance that you follow exactly this template, both for consistency purposes, as well as in order to ensure that all the parts, all the different parts of the brand, the communication plan process are adequately reflected in the different sections of the advertising brief. A few words about the briefing process per se. Usually, two briefs circulate from brand management to the ad agency's media shop, or across the media agencies in the brand's portfolio. That is the creative and the media brief. In this syllabus, we're going to concentrate on the creative brief, given that the IMC mix is going to be developed by you in-house. Ideally, they should be developed at the same time as the vehicles in IMC plan constrain to some extent the choice of creative and institutional elements. As we really stressed, especially during the past lecture, the creative strategy drives the selection of media, and not the other way around. Media is not the message. Both briefs must include detailed background information about the market, consumer dynamics, segmentation, competition, and competitive advertising. For example, facts like value volume growth, need states, usage occasions, market trends, creative strategies, and major promotions, national and local. If you may recall, competitive advertising analysis is an integral part of a brand audit process. You don't need to reach the communications planning process and the different planning phases for creative and media in order to start considering competitive advertising. The reason is that, as I'm sure you may recall, that advertising cues are indispensable parts of your brand order structure. Just like branding elements, for example, slogans, or logos, or brand signatures, or sonic logos. By the same token, advertising cues both for your own brand as for your own competition are integral elements of your brand knowledge structure as sources. In this respect, you are supposed to have completed your advertising competitive review prior to reaching this the stage of briefing. You are not supposed to wait until you reach the very communications planning phase in order to start considering advertising communications. Because at the end of the day, these are the main source where from you may go what are the main brand associations that are pursued by your competition, both in terms of brand essence as well as in terms of peripheral brand associations that are built through advertising executions or through any other vehicle that is part of an IMC plan. Additional briefs, of course, these two briefs, creative and media, are not the only ones. There are many briefing forms and briefing processes based on the different vehicles that are part of an IMC plan. For example, there is a bespoke PR brief, sales promotions brief for a sales promotion agency, sponsorship brief, brief for social media influencers, social media planning and monitoring agencies, direct marketing agencies, and so on and so forth. The main contents of an advertising brief, according to Bells and Bells, are 9. I'm expanding this to 13, so let's look at into each of these individual sections in detail. First of all, what is required? There should be a very concisely formulated sentence about what you expect from your advertising agency, so that it becomes immediately comprehensible what they should be looking into prior to going through all the details that are doing in the briefing. The advertising briefing tends to be quite extensive. In this case, for your assignment, this sentence would amount to the development of an advertising concept for your new program launch, supported by the creative strategy and the big idea. Always, when asking for a new advertising concept, first of all, you don't jump straight into the vehicle. For example, unless it's an existing concept, when you are requesting a new advertising concept, new advertising platform, creative platform from your advertising agency, you should always start with the main concept. We're going to look into different forms whereby such concepts are delivered by the agency later on. But also, very important, the creative strategy that addresses it. We went through the different creative strategies last week, and the big idea. Second, marketing background. This is very important in order to allow the advertising agencies to understand where you're coming from and where you want to go, but also what kind of barriers you may encounter in the process in terms of competitors, established associations, and so on and so forth. So this section of your advertising brief should include both hard and soft facts, that is, both hard market-related oriented facts, as well as soft equity-oriented or brand image facts. Starting with the information about the market structure, how many players, its evolution year on year for at least 3 years in terms of value, volume, and what kind of market trends are dominant, for example, for specific variants, for specific flavors, sizes, and so on. Consumer dynamics, what kind of segments make up your market, and what is the relative growth of each segment. Very important because your communications are always developed and delivered on a segment-specific basis. Consumption trends and media usage habits. It's very important if you have this information because this may direct the agency to develop creatives that are more amenable to being adapted for different social media vehicles, for example, or for different above-the-line vehicles, and so on and so forth, your IMC mix. So the media usage habits per segment is a very important piece of information for your assignment as well. But that's the competitive landscape across the 4 Ps. It's because the analysis of competitive brand communications, usually this is a joint effort between brand management and the ad agency. For example, not only yourself, you're supposed to do this background research, but of course when the agency, especially when it comes to competitive communications, they're analyzing, they're trying to gauge what is the optimal direction for your advertising concept. This presupposes that they have dealt quite extensively into competitive advertising. You should receive a report of this competitive advertising review from the agency in order to understand whether they have done what's required of them in terms of monitoring the competitive landscape. Whether there are any seasonality issues for categories like chocolate or ice cream, this is of paramount importance. What kind of stature is currently cherished by the mother brand? Your assignment revolves around strategic line extension. So the current stature in the market of your mother brand is very important in order to understand what kind of associated transfers may be effected between your extension and the mother brand. Again, your ad agency should look at this territory quite intensively, because as you may recall from the first 3 lectures, these transfers may attain to yield both positive but also occasionally negative associations to the mother brand and vice versa from the mother brand from the extension to the mother brand. And all of the above must be backed by data that stem from ad hoc tracking or syndicated service studies. As we look into different kinds of research that may be used as background information during the first 4 lectures, from trackers to ad hoc practical studies, as well as to retail audits. Section 3, the brand and communication objectives. This should be inserted from your brand audit, which includes your brand objectives, and from communication strategy, which includes your communication objectives, as I went through lectures 3 and 8 respectively. 4, information about your target audiences. The target audience may not be one, might be primary, secondary, sometimes tertiary audience, but also micro segments, especially if you have the capability of implementing planning methodology such as touchpoints integration. If you can recall from lecture 7, touchpoints integration is very much oriented around very narrowly targeted macro segments, and this is precisely its success compared to traditional media planning, that it has the power to focus communications on very narrowly defined segments, and sometimes in such terms that allow for targeting individual consumers within the segments. But also, you should describe what is your overall audience persona, what's called the audience persona. That is a concise description of the ideal user type. If you remember from your brand owner structure, what is the user image along with the user's image, 2 integral components of the brand owner structure. So you should include a concise description of each audience in terms of demographics, psychographics, lifestyle characteristics, but also media usage and what kind of brand usage habits they're currently adopting as regards the mother brand. 5, what kind of insights that are available to drive the creative work, especially if you have information for product tests. It's very important that you share it with the advertising agency, because this information may include, for example, issues about the product's functionality, not in terms of this functionality, but in terms of a new mode of usage. Some of you, as regards your project, your assignment projects, proposed a new line extension, extensions that include potentially new modes of usage. This would require definitely education. So a considerable part of your brand communication should also have an educated character. But as you may also recall, one of the benefits of using an experiential medium but also social medium is to add fun to the very educative process. This is why we talk about edutainment but also gamification. So these are important trends backed up by technological capabilities and ample case studies that will be drawn in order to not only educate your target market, but do this in a very involving, engaging, and fun manner. Potential issues with the associated transfers from another brand, potential issues with existing substitutes in the market. Again, all of these aspects are usually covered in a product pretest, especially if this test includes scenario planning that is different loan scenario with different inputs in your market variables, or a simulated test market. Background information stemming from UNA studies as regards attitudes towards own and competitive brands. Background information from EMA studies about brand associations. Needless to say, this is of absolutely primordial importance to include in your advertising brief form, because at the end of the day, what you're looking for from an equity point of view and from a strategic brand management equity-oriented point of view is to nurture certain specific associations by employing your advertising. This is what I was called the semantic kernel. Background information from home panel data as regards behavioral loyalty and share of repertoire. Share of repertoire is a very useful metric from Nielsen home panel that includes how many brands you usually purchase within a given category, as well as what is the percentage of your brand within this share of repertoire. Most of the categories are repertoire driven. There's no such very few categories where the consumers purchase only one brand, and if that brand was not available, they would not buy anything else, or they would keep on looking for different retail outlets until they find their preferred brand. These are very few and mostly exceptional cases. So the first one concerns behavioral loyalty, that is actual repurchase data. And the second one concerns attitudinal, in the sense of attitudinal loyalty, that is how high your brand ranks within the share of repertoire. What is your unique selling proposition? Remember, the unique selling proposition is not something that the advertising agency is supposed to do for you. This is a very basic task of brand management. That is, as soon as you have finished your positioning strategy and you have carved your targeting and audience, you've calculated your key audiences and how you will target them, what you should develop is, along the position statement, your unique selling proposition, which is a reflection of your positioning statement, along the emotional selling point. Now, this USP, once received by the ad agency, will be translated into what is called a single-minded proposition. That is, what is the key data? If there were a key data, one sentence that would summarize the aboveness of an advertising execution, then that should be what is remembered by most of consumers. This is what's called single-minded proposition, because beneath, below, and throughout the entire story that may deploy throughout an advertising execution, its semantic error should be amenable to being summarized in a single-minded proposition. And it should of course be reflective of the big idea. This section should also include, from an equity point of view, which elements from a brand model structure must be drawn upon in terms of brand assets, your core brand association, but also peripheral brand associations, both in terms of benefits and attributes, as well as product bound, that is primary, as well as no product bound abstract brand associations. Again, this is something that should have been decided by the brand management team during the brand auditing process that is prior to being delivered to the agency, although ultimately this should be a collaborative process with the agency given that advertising agencies also have experience from occasionally from other players in the same category they're competing in, so they can bring in insights from their own research or from their own discussion with previous clients and so on and so forth. In any case, the closer the relationship we develop with the ad agency in terms of sharing parts of the strategic planning process, the better the results are likely to be. Not always, but at least in theory, by the book. 7, what kind of reason to believe should the consumer have, what kind of reason does the consumer have to believe in your USP and in your projected brand associations? This is called the substantiation of your USP. It stands for rhetoric. In rhetoric, it's called warrant. Is how you can provide concrete evidence and supporting information about the brand equity, brand value structure that you want to build in consumer minds. So, for example, hard facts such as you're talking about unique performance, what kind of data, research data do you have that suggests that your performance is superior to the existing competitors? You're talking about a new innovative ingredient, what kind of chemical tests or other objectively accepted by an independent authority are available for substantiating this claim. It's very important because you cannot raise claims, especially when it comes to the product side of things, without having sufficient substantiation, because then you're amenable, of course, to a legal suit, to a legal procedure by a competitor, who may feel that what you're saying is not valid or you don't have enough evidence. So you just, mislead consumers. So this is not just a matter of providing complete information for the agency. This is information that most of the times appears in the actual communication. For example, relevant information from product pre-testing, the percentage of top 2 boxes on 7-point Likert scale on product attributes or benefits X, Y, which suggests that compared to norms, your new brand launch is likely to outperform both competitors as well as previous launches. This is very important information for the retailers as well. This is more functional oriented info. As I said, it must be concrete and objectively verifiable by an independent authority or agency. It contains more rational claims. However, secondary brand associations may also be included, yet they tend to be more embedded in visual mode and storytelling rather than in rational claims. Tone of voice. This is all about what kind of rhetorical appeal will be dominant in your advertising execution, and it should be also customized by medium, because different media have different affordances in terms of what kind of appeals you may raise and how you may raise them. For example, the more multimodal the communicative approach, the more you can accommodate effectively humor or education. As is well known, information-driven launch tends to capitalize more print publications because you have greater scope for expanding in terms of technical information. However, the more, let's say, lifestyle the brand and the more image-driven and the more transformative the advertising, by using the strategic, the advertising strategy, creative strategy typologies that we looked at last week, the more you tend to use media like TV, online TV, or other media that tend to be more multisensorial, for example, experiential events. 9, what kind of executional guidelines you may provide to the ad agency. This does not mean that you will guide them 100% and step by step as to how they will develop their advertising, or specifically what kind of visuals or sonic signs or like themes they will be using. Otherwise, you will be doing the job yourselves. But you should alert them either to specific mandates, mandatory elements that must be included by all means. That is, certain claims that may not be made explicitly due to legal issues. So they must be looking for another way to raise them, for example, visual. Branding elements that must be used, the contrary. For example, logo, slogan, sonic signature, all of these elements, more likely than not, they will have to be used one or more times. Another example is scrolling text with addresses findings that appears at the bottom of specific shots of frames which substantiate the claims that are made in the respective frame or shot. Whether a pack shot is required at the end of the commercial, whether specific endorsers should be used as part of a prior agreement, for example with actors or seniors, as we looked at extensively in the context of brand strategies, endorsement as well as co-branding and joint promotions are very important vehicles. Justification, finally, of which primary and secondary brand associations are tied up with which unexpressive elements and how. Again, we should not wait for the ad agency to justify how what they propose coheres with the brand associations. You should be already very well prepared as regards your formal addresses and what comes peripheral associations. Deliverables, specific deliverables with dates, what is needed and when. Now, among these deliverables are both the creative strategy that will have been developed by the ad agency, as well as specific executions. For example, 30-second TVC, print ads, media, topics that may be posted in your social media community. The time frame for its deliverables from initial draft to finished execution. And finally, what is the targeting air date for your campaign? Then you should include information about your available budget, overall as well as by medium and creative execution if possible. Otherwise, your plan may be disproportionate or disproportionately expressed compared to what you have been expecting. Then, the vehicles in the MC plan. Again, in your assignment, you're responsible for developing your own media plan. So this is not something that will be developed in normal circumstances by your media shop. You are at the same time brand managers and media planners. So you should inform them if there are specific vehicles that must be used either across segments and communication objectives or for specific micro segments. And finally, what kind of measures of effectiveness will be used in order to gauge the success of your advertising launch by communication objective. That is, in case the ad agency will conduct testing, to provide you with feedback about key dimensions, such as the credibility of the message, the likability of the execution, specific likes and dislikes about the execution, intention to buy, switch, or recommend pre and post exposure to ad, and finally, what kind of marketing objectives buttress your advertising plan, that is the KPIs and respective metrics across the MC effectiveness pillars, as stipulated by YAB, as we discussed in lecture 7. Any questions so far? Any questions? Okay. Now let's move on to your other packaging brief, which is also an integral part of your assignments.